Good afternoon, everyone. If you're planning to stay for the session, come on in so we can get going. So this session is going to differ slightly from most others you guys are attending in that it's meant to be extremely informal and is really envisioned as a conversation. If I had to sum up this session in terms of its goal, I would say it's informational and largely I've invited all of you to be here because I need help. So it'll become clear what we're going to talk about and ways in which I think people can participate. So the idea here is I have a few of my colleagues here to my left, and we'll talk about a brand new, very exciting opportunity and initiative that's really a consortium or an alliance work that we're going to delve into for the next 4 years. And as we delve into it, it's something that for it to be successful will require not only everyone in this room, but many, many hundreds more people who are out there and are all active members of this field. Because what we're hoping this will be is something that is really a communal or community building kind of effort, and for it to succeed, we need everyone's help. So this is the National Alliance for Audition Support. The purpose behind this project is really to create a support system, a network, a large, broad network, that as a result of its programming, it will help affect the number of Black and Latinx musicians in orchestras across the country. But beyond that, kind of on a more holistic level, the idea is that several organizations and a group of musicians have gotten together to talk about ways in which we can affect the whole field and ways in which we can help orchestras be more inclusive and more embracing and more welcoming. Probably the simplest way to describe this effort is that through the generous support and leadership from the Mellon Foundation, we're going to embark on a journey for the National Alliance for Audition Support, and Sphinx will collaborate with the New World Symphony Orchestra as well as the League of American Orchestras, and hopefully a very large community of symphony orchestras across the country, as well as musicians themselves, to embark in this journey together. There will be kind of the main components that that we've outlined for ourselves would be an audition support fund, essentially just a bank of money that's really been designed to help musicians themselves who are preparing and continuing on their journey to prepare for careers in orchestras. So that's kind of one main component. There is a New World Symphony boot camp that I'd like Cassidy to talk about in just a little bit, as well as a series of coachings and mentorship opportunities for musicians who would like to incorporate that aspect in their preparation. But ultimately, things that I'd love to talk to you guys about are going to be mostly questions and opportunities for folks in the audience to ask questions, because as we're building this, the largest thing that I'm hoping we can walk away from in this short session is an opportunity for dialogue and ways in which musicians in the room can help navigate and also help us architect and be better tuned into how to build this program. So there's a lot of flexibility in these components, and there's a lot of opportunity for us to better and fine-tune what we've already outlined. But in order to do that, we kind of need everyone's input. So as we do this, I'd like to just throw it to my friends here at the table so that you guys can at least say your name, your position, and also the role that your organization will play in this National Alliance.
Hello, everybody. My name is Cassidy Fitzpatrick. I'm the Vice President for Musician Advancement with the New World Symphony in Miami Beach. For those of you who are not familiar with the New World Symphony, we're an accredited educational institution, and we provide postgraduate fellowships for orchestral musicians. It's a 3-year program, and we hope that they will become the leaders in our orchestras and ensembles around the country and around the globe after their time with us at New World. One of the many activities that the fellows participate in while they're at New World is an audition-intensive preparation. And we would like to recreate this for the National Alliance in a 3-day summer program that would invite musicians of color to come work with visiting faculty members, which are the same visiting faculty members that New World Symphony hires during our season, as well as people who are studying the field of performance psychology and other aspects that contribute to audition preparation. And we will host the intensive at New World Center and try to give the experience that we're providing to our fellows to more people. Additionally, we're hoping to set up some distance masterclasses, which is something that we also do with our fellows, which would be open to even more applicants. But basically, we would be providing long-distance coaching at different locations throughout the country for participants in this program.
Hello, I'm Jesse Rosen. I'm president of the League of American Orchestras, and we're the national association for all the orchestras in the United States. And I was just thinking about Afa's opening remarks yesterday, and followed by Aaron's about how change happens, and that it's kind of one step at a time. And a little context on this effort really goes back to about 2 years ago, when the League, together with the Mellon Foundation, decided to get a lot of people together to talk about diversity in the orchestra field and try to figure out what are the challenges and where are the opportunities and how could we make change. And it was out of that first meeting where many of us heard musician after musician stand up and say that one of the biggest, most significant barriers to getting their careers developed and into orchestras was, number one, the need for financial support to travel to auditions. Number two, the need for financial support so you could turn down work, so you could prepare for auditions. Number three, the need for mentorship, so that the time-worn method that's across all sectors for advancing talent is mentorship. Those messages were delivered loud and clear. And it was out of that first meeting 2 years ago that a number of task forces got put together. And one of them specifically was to work on auditions, one was to work on mentorships. And the work of those groups kind of converged. And then this idea came up, well, let's do something where we can combine all of these things and have an array of ways of supporting African American and Latino talent at the threshold of entry into orchestral careers. And that's really how this thing evolved. And along the way, at the League, we introduced this idea a year ago to our members and talked with all the CEOs, and we said, we want to put this thing together, and we want America's orchestras to participate financially. And this was before we knew we could get any support from the Mellon Foundation. Originally, it was going to be funded entirely by orchestras. And I can tell you happily that across the board, our members from the biggest orchestras to the smallest have said, we want to be part of this. We want to participate financially. And not only that, they said, we also want a seat at the table. We care about this, and we care about this issue, and we want to be part of the brains and the strategy. We don't want to just write checks, but we also want to be in on the thinking. And so this conversation with our membership has been going on for 2 years. And then just this week, on Monday, Andre and Jania were with me in New York when we had our annual meeting of all the CEOs. We went through all the different meetings, the different budget groups. We laid this thing out, and we said it's happening, and we're still going to want your money. We're really happy that Mellon's participating, and Susan, thank you very much. And they still want to be in it. So our orchestras will be participating financially, but also, as I said, they will have a seat at the strategic table. And it's kind of a footnote, but it's really important to say that I think at the League, I know we understand that this piece of work is only a piece of the work that needs to be done, that there are a wide range of other dimensions to the making orchestras healthy, vital places, welcoming to all different kinds of people. And that work around orchestra culture and around inclusion is something we're also working on. This program is just one piece, but we recognize there's this wider piece out there. I think I'll leave it there, and Jania.
Hello, my name is Jania Stegall. I'm the project manager for the National Alliance for Audition Support. My role in this project is, I think, just being the person on the ground, collecting the stories and collecting information from the musicians, from the administrators, from everyone that wants to be involved in this effort. Because I think it's most important that this is an artist-informed initiative, and it's not just something that we're deciding is best for musicians, but it's something that musicians themselves are telling us that this is what we need, this is what we want, this is what we struggle with. And so I'm very excited to be a part of this.
Great. Ginny, will you talk a little about kind of this first area where I think we'll need a lot of help from musicians who are here with us this week, but also musicians beyond, that questionnaire piece and kind of what you expect will happen and how soon it'll likely to hit everyone's inboxes and all of that.
So right now we're developing a survey that we're hoping to send out to as many Black and Latinx musicians as possible in the early and pre-professional and early professional stages of their careers, just to find out how many auditions are you taking each year, what would be most helpful for you to help you take more auditions. Do you have a mentor? What do you look for in a mentor? What type of training do you want? Just to collect the data and collect these stories and collect it in a quantitative sort of way so we can use that to inform the project.
Great. And I wanted Jania to outline that and spend a moment focusing on it because it's great to come up with a really precise survey instrument and spend months building it. But it is of no value if it's not in the hands of the right folks who can help us gather that data, which is why we kind of appeal to this group and say, we need your help because Sphinx is so fortunate and blessed to have a large network of musicians, but we don't know everyone. We also have great partners who have their own databases. So a lot of musicians and a lot of colleagues are putting our heads together to make sure that we cast as wide a net as possible. But I know we can't do it alone. So there will be musicians who might be in your personal Rolodexes or whatever the equivalent of today's Rolodex is. And I'm partly saying, please make sure that colleagues and friends, mentors, teachers know about it so that we can, so that our information can be as complete as possible, as precise as possible, and really so that this effort becomes authentic and useful. But since we're all together here, and because you guys did choose to come to the session, I thought I would treat the session too as an opportunity to turn it into a focus group. So kind of as you've heard, first, I think everyone knows already by now what to do with your questions. If you don't feel like, if you're not one of those extroverts who likes to come up to the microphone and ask questions, another way to do it is to type in the Slido and enter SphinxConnect and just add a question, and it should pop up magically on my iPad here. But as you contemplate and percolate what questions you might be asking, based on what you've heard so far, how many of those in the audience are actively pursuing or thinking of actively pursuing auditions for professional orchestras? Wow, that's great. Awesome. How many in the audience have taken more than 5 already? More than 15? You're like, It's okay, nobody's gonna report it. Great, so this is like an entirely, it's a closed conversation and it's meant to be really an exchange. Great, that's really helpful. Just based on your experience, how many in the audience feel that the most important area that might have been prohibitive before is really financial resources? And if you had enough of them, you'd take 10 or 20 more. That's great. Great. So what about the opportunity that Cassidy was describing, the boot camp, an opportunity to essentially have a retreat where you go in and study with the best professionals and have that kind of, and it's paid for, so you can actually take off your gigging. How many would be interested in that? This is going to be a very successful program. Everyone's interested in everything. How many feel that what's lacking is that coach or the support mechanism, somebody who's a mentor and could help? Interesting. Yeah, this is getting better. Okay, great, wonderful, very helpful. So how about if we open it up to questions based on what you've heard so far? What pops to your mind immediately to learn more about what we're doing? Yes, ma'am. You want to come up to the mic? If you're like me, I can't project.
Hi. So I actually was one of those people that just kind of did that for the mentorship question.
That's okay, I would too.
Yeah. So I'm actually finishing up in university right now, and in a way, I'm kind of scared of the next step of not having the university support in this mentorship quality.
Mhm.
And, you know, a lot of times to study with the best, it's a financial, it's hard
Absolutely.
to pay $200 for someone that is
Mhm.
worth it. But how can the panel like address that kind of obstacle?
Sure. I can just tell you now that the best thing that you could be doing, in case if you haven't done so already, is to make sure that you become best friends with Jania and she has all of your information. The reason I say this actually is because one of the facets of this effort addresses just that.
Okay.
There will be a framework which we're formulating now that's going to become public very shortly in terms of how to apply for that financial assistance.
Yeah.
And I think once we have that in place, then this is a perfect opportunity to get support through those efforts. But we want to make sure, I mean, likely we know how to get a hold of you because I'm looking at your name, but I just want to make sure no one walks away from this short session without touching base. If you still have questions, I think the most important thing is that this community needs to stay close together so that we know how to get a hold of one another. And we're just fortunate to have someone who's a musician herself to be able to then assemble the information and figure out a way that we can make sure the support gets to the right people.
Okay, thank you.
I would just like to add that it's been said a lot at this conference, but networking. I've heard offers from so many professional musicians who are willing to listen to recordings, who are willing to give feedback.
Yes.
It doesn't have to be a $200 an hour lesson. And also to all the young musicians, I would highly encourage you to submit your application and audition for New World Symphony. We'd love to hear you play. We'd love to get to know you.
Awesome.
And I'd also like to add that in the project, what we describe as the mentorship opportunities isn't necessarily something that you would get from like a private teacher. It could be someone from a different section in the orchestra that might help you. Well, how do I decide when to start taking lessons for auditions, and just
Great.
more general personal professional guidance and advice.
That's a great point too. So I have magic popping up here. I'm getting old. Okay, so the question here is, having just attended a session on musicians traveling and working abroad, I wondered, will there be funding available for international travel and professional auditions? That's a great question. We haven't figured that piece out, but I would say we're not close to the possibility because the idea is to promote the same kind of principle of diversity and inclusion. I think our strong focus is to affect change first here in American orchestras, but it's not to say that that would not be considered. So I'd say still network and let us know what you're doing. Are there more live questions before I refer to magic more? Yeah, come on up, dear.
Hey, my name is Marquis. I'm a student at the New England Conservatory, play trombone, and I had a question, just I guess regarding summer festivals. You know, because I'm a sophomore, and you know, definitely been looking into summer festivals and things like that, and I constantly get told that like they have a really high importance when it comes to you know, taking orchestral auditions, as far as like, you know, because a lot of jobs that I look at, they have like, you know, they want to see your resume first. You know, as a student, you know, I hear that it doesn't really matter, like, you know, that you played in your student orchestras and things like that, and you need to be going out to summer festivals. But the issue for me is that, you know, you don't get paid while you're at the summer festival. So, and I have to work to fund my college. So, and it's like, you know, working over the summers, you make, you know, I mean, minimum wage, you might make like, I don't know, like 4,000, 5,000 over the summer versus not getting paid at all, but going to a summer festival. So I guess like, what would you recommend to do in that situation?
Great question. First, is there anyone on the panel who'd like to take it?
I'm not sure if your question about whether or not this program would support the costs of going to a summer festival, is that kind of what you're asking?
Well, no, I guess I'm more so just asking, like the importance of summer festivals as far as like taking auditions.
I have no idea.
Well, all right.
Summer festivals are a great way to network, as we've talked about. You know, in the orchestral field is a very small world, and the more people that you play for and the more feedback you get, of course, is beneficial. But as a sophomore, and considering that you depend on the cash flow for your studies, I think you have a lot of opportunity during the school year to play. So, you know, I wouldn't beat yourself up about if you have to take a summer off from a summer festival.
You know, one thing I might say about this is that I think what we're hoping is that that this would be a completely musician-centered effort, so that there's not an idea that we'd have a kind of a cookie-cutter approach, but rather through some kind of application and, you know, competitive selection system, we will identify musicians, and through mentors and Sphinx's leadership, be able to address each musician uniquely with respect to what their needs are. So in some instances it might be you know, a stipend so you can turn down work and prepare for auditions. Another, it could be to go to a summer festival. Another could be to go to Europe for 2 years. I mean, whatever it is. But I think we really want to establish this as a place where musicians can go and have available to them an array of potential resources, and also in Sphinx, people who are qualified to help make intelligent, informed decisions about, you know, the appropriate pathways for each individual musician's next steps.
Great. Joy, why don't you pose a question, then there's a number here,
Okay, thank you.
magical ones.
You mentioned that this initiative is a small piece of the puzzle, and usually in order to successfully complete a puzzle, you need all the pieces in place. So I'm curious if you could briefly talk about some of the other pieces and what, if any, plans there are to attack on those fronts.
Great question. May as well leave it on, Jesse.
Well, there's a whole bunch, and you know, I could only speak to a few, I guess. But you know, in the orchestra field, I think the one that comes to mind most for me, and I think is the biggest and possibly even the hardest challenge, has to do with the internal culture of orchestras. And to some degree, I think this is parallel to what's happened in the corporate sector, where, you know, 25 or 30 years ago, when there was a big push to diversify corporate America, the emphasis was on getting people in, and that was the end of the job. And people came in and then they left, because the environments were in no way welcoming to diverse people working successfully together. And I think orchestras have a similar challenge ahead of them, and I think that's our learning from the past. You know, in the study that we had commissioned and released last year that tried to understand what happened in the 40 years of fellowships in American orchestras, that was one of the big findings, that once the fellowship position was created, very little was done either in terms of developing a learning plan with intentionality and really stretching the orchestra's capacity to be a learning organization, and little was done to engage and align board, staff, audience, community around the aims and goals of having a diverse orchestra and an orchestra connected to its community. So I think the opportunity now is for orchestras to also turn their attention not just to who's coming on the stage and who's coming onto the staff, but how to create cultures that really support a diverse workplace. What we are working on at the League in this regard, and it's very early planning stages, so I don't really know exactly how it's going to come out, but we are aware that orchestras have a lot of internal work to do, and we're beginning to do some R&D work on a program that would help orchestras have financial resources to retain practitioners in diversity, equity, and inclusion work, so that they have the benefit of people who actually do this for a living. And there's a whole practice area around this, and we think our field could benefit from taking advantage of the work that those practitioners offer. So that's one piece that occurs to me. Janine?
At New World Symphony, we are working on a few other initiatives. First, of course, we wanted to look internally and see about the culture of inclusion that we wanted to create within our staff, board, and our fellowship, and paying attention to, once we have Black and Latinx musicians, how are we making our community the most inclusive that it can be? To that end, we have now an HR department at New World Symphony, which is fantastic. And of course, it's a continued journey, but we're working very hard on it. Second is a local initiative, mostly through our community engagement work, to focus on some of our strategic partnerships in South Florida with our local El Sistema chapter. Of course, Miami is a majority minority city, so we have a lot of people to serve right in our own backyard. And so my background in community engagement, I've been working a lot on how can I support our public school system instrumental programs, and how can I support our local after-school programs to make sure that more students are playing instruments. And another program that we have through community engagement is right now actively partnering with the Atlanta Talent Development Program, as well as the Nashville's Accelerando program, and serving those students as best we can with our fellows.
Great, thank you. Come on.
Hi, my name is Adedeji Ogunfolu, and the question I have is about prioritization in terms of who will be considered for scholarships. Is it people who are in school? Is it people who are like me, like in my career and looking to advance? Yeah.
Sure. I think to begin with, it was our sense that we'll look as broadly as possible, and it's also our understanding that we'll probably learn a lot throughout the first year. I think for the first year, we were all hoping to look at things as broadly as possible and not exclude, no pun intended, and as much as possible look at each individual musician, just as Jesse referenced, from a standpoint of their needs and their journey. So they may very well still be in school, but already taking auditions. At the same time, there could be someone who's already begun the process of audition taking and maybe past school. And however, now's the time when they need those funds to propel them forward. So in other words, we'll probably not be as choosy to begin with, so that we can help as many people as possible at first. And then my hope is that the first kind of beneficiaries, or the first cohort of musicians who will have gone through that, will help us learn in terms of where the need is mostly and what we can be doing in a little bit more of a focused way and better, frankly. Did you want to add something, Jeannie?
Yes. Hi. I would just say that I think the focus of the project is early professional musicians and pre-professional musicians. And I guess just because that can mean you can win a job when you're a sophomore, but you can also win your first job when you're 50. So I think the focus is just musicians that are prepared to utilize and take advantage of the resources we're able to provide.
Great. So a lot of the questions here, I think, were already answered, almost all of them. There's one question here from someone who said that they're a senior in high school and are wondering if there's a preparatory program to inform your young students about what this entails. So the purpose of this program doesn't yet embrace or target that age group. We're not looking at high school through this effort. However, we are having some conversations about what that age group can benefit from as a result of the sort of older or more mature effort. So it's my hope that we're going to come up with something that begins to serve the pipeline earlier, but not through this particular alliance effort.
Hi there, I'm Christina, and I'm wondering if you're doing anything to reform the actual audition process beyond simply just providing funding to take auditions.
That's a great question. Any takers before I try to go there? Okay, so, all right, I'll answer this with wearing my hat in terms of my role in this project. This project isn't... Woohoo! That's great.
Sorry, do you mind?
No, I'd love it more than anything.
Let me take a shot at this. So, I'm going to turn around so I can actually look at all of you. My name is Rochelle Skolnick, and I'm the Director of Symphonic Services for the AFM. And probably most of you know that our audition processes are things that have developed over many generations of musicians, and they're a function of our collective bargaining agreements. And so to the extent that we talk about making changes in our audition processes, that's going to happen really at the grassroots level in bargaining between individual groups of musicians, collective bargaining units within individual orchestras and their employers. I think there's a lot of interest in examining what our audition processes look like. And I've heard some proposals that run the gamut, from things like we ought to have screens for the entire process. I mean, right now, we have screens in most of our orchestra auditions that cover at least up through the final round, but in many of those places, the screen comes down for the final round. And there is a school of thought that says that we would have more diverse results from our auditions if we had screens the whole way up. The screens have obviously been extremely successful at increasing gender diversity. And those screens are, again, a function of negotiated agreements between local unions and musicians and their employers. There's another school of thought that says that we should start to look at different criteria for hiring musicians and not just base it on what happens in 10 minutes on a given day, and how you play in those 10 minutes. So I mean, I think these are really interesting conversations that we need to have in our industry. But ultimately, if we're going to make changes, those things have to come from the ground up. So
That's
thank
great.
you.
So much more eloquent and informed than I could do. Come on up.
Yeah. Would you consider instruments loan as part of audition help?
Oh, interesting. I think at this point it could be considered, yes. It wouldn't be dismissed. Because we're going to, again, through the first year, we're going to learn where the most amount of need is, not excluding instruments. Yeah.
My question is in response to, I guess, diversity coming from the ground up. We've been waiting for a long time for that to happen.
Amen to that, yeah.
So what are some other ways or alternatives that we could do to encourage more support? I think that a lot of musicians aren't in a position, when they're auditioning to, collectively bargain with the orchestra to reevaluate audition standards.
Yeah, I think what you're raising is an important and a powerful component in what I think the whole field has been talking about. And it goes to Jesse's point of defining this as a musician-centric program. So there's what's actually on paper and the specific goal of this project, which is literally to help orchestras become more diverse, help musicians of color gain placement and employment in orchestras. At the same time, it sounds simplistic, and I know so much more is involved, and we spent some amount of time talking about that puzzle. What I think and I hope will happen as a result of this work is that we're going to gain a much broader community of supporters and advocates, not only through those who will go through and actually take auditions, but through engagement and involvement from orchestras themselves, who, once they have a seat at the table and once they have a say in terms of how this process occurs and how musicians are prepared and how much their own orchestras are prepared to be inclusive, in the end, I'm hoping that as a result of these conversations and conversations that involve all of the folks at the table, there will be buy-in and that understanding. So while that's not the primary capacity of this project, I think indirectly, and I hope that indirectly, it'll have that very effect that's been missing or lacking.
Absolutely. I think just one last question then.
Yeah.
What mechanisms are there outside of the formal, arbitration, collective bargaining agreement process, besides this program that we're working on, that would give orchestras more flexibility to kind of
Flexibility to
address some of the diversity and inclusion issues we've been raising around musicians and auditions? And
I should throw that to
programming.
a leader of an orchestra who might be here. Or perhaps back to Jesse. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, no. Oh, yay. This is a team effort.
My name is Meredith Snow. I'm a violist with the Los Angeles Philharmonic, and I'm also right now the chair of the Exome, which is the International Conference of Symphony and Opera Musicians. So we have about 52 orchestras in our organization. They have a delegate, and we get together. And mostly, it's a conference within the AFM, and so we mostly talk about things like the audition process and how you negotiate your contract and, all of that stuff. So what we're trying to do is to broaden this topic to fellowships is one way that we're kind of starting to open the door. We have them in Pittsburgh and Los Angeles and LACO, Los Angeles Chamber Orchestra, Detroit, of course. So that's what we're trying to do. Is, you know, you can't change the audition process until you change the contract that it's based upon. I mean, it's such a densely rigid, codified process. Everything that happens in the orchestra is dependent on the contract that you negotiate. And this is something that Jesse and I are also working on. I'm going to get way out on a ledge here and talk about orchestra culture. The orchestras that function together between player and management smoothly, well, they recognize the similar goals, are making great strides in every area of their orchestras, and orchestras that are still fighting together. Hi, Susan Fetter, we haven't met yet. You know, are struggling. They're struggling financially. They're struggling to work together. They're not part of their community. So all of these things, the doors are opening slowly. It's changing, but it's a big process. And we are hogtied by the law. So that has to change.
Absolutely.
You know, just to piggyback on that, I think it's one of the great, I think, unanticipated outcomes of the work we've been doing in getting this program together and other efforts in our field has been the joining together of the leadership from Exome and the AFM, together with orchestra managers in the League and Sphinx and ROPA, thank you, and the Gateways Music Festival, and it's been an enormous boost and great satisfaction to be working together with musician leaders on this issue. And it's something that actually, I think, has drawn managers and musicians together in an area of enormous strategic consequence to our field that I think it will bear more and more fruit as we go forward. And just the participation of the elected leadership of the musician community is already, I think, resonating loudly through the field and helping this work be of a higher quality. So I just want to note that this is an area I think of really important progress, and Meredith and Rochelle know how grateful I am because I tell them for their participation. I'm really glad that they're here, and thank you both for your comments this afternoon.
Absolutely. And as this particular session might come to a close, I'll raise a very important and most liked question, which I overlooked before. I do want to say that this is just the beginning of a conversation. I really and truly mean that this doesn't go very far without input and some challenging and difficult questions which we may only be able to answer partially because we haven't delved into this work yet. So please continue to consider becoming more closely involved, not only from the sense of beneficiaries, but understand as you consider your involvement, you are already helping because we're trying to shape it in a manner that most serves the musicians themselves. And we can't do that without the musicians at the table. But the one practical question that's liked 7 times, when is this thing launching? Hello. Right, so it's great question. This thing has launched. We are in a planning session right now, planning period. I think Jeannie has been working hard with all of our partners and, I don't know, maybe a dozen musicians to fine-tune and create that survey instrument that helps us understand how best to address the need and what the biggest needs are within the space. I think within a month, there will be a survey at the very latest, so you could probably expect it at the very latest in your inbox within a month, so I ask you to please take a moment. We're making it short, but so razor sharp and helpful. So that's when the questionnaire starts. Immediately after the questionnaire, we're going to go into interpreting it and kind of fine-tuning some of our own guidelines in terms of application process for the audition support. The very first boot camp is scheduled for first week of June, and we plan to be able to also take applications and disperse funds as early as the spring. It is a 4-year-long project, so we plan to go through a cycle of it through the first year and learn a lot and potentially tweak and fine-tune what we're doing based on our learning experience and based on the anticipated input you guys will give us. So that's the timeline. I am being alerted to close this session so we can move on to the showcase, but please, just reach out. I'd say the point person is Jania. She's right there. She's extremely responsive and super smart. So you reach out to her with any question and or input. We'll do our very best to synthesize and incorporate that. Thank you very much for coming to this.